All right, folks, thanks for joining our newest episode of Cybersecurity Decoded here at Rubrik Zero Labs. Really excited you chose to spend some time with us. Cybersecurity Decoded is our opportunity at Rubrik Zero Labs to either talk about net new research and findings or else really learn from who we think are critical drivers in our industry. And our discussion today will really be around that second. I'm really excited for our guest. Quick recap previously, we've spoke with Sandra Joyce, the head of Mandiant Intelligence. We met with Suzette Kent previously, who was the former government CIO for the US government. And then we've had Wendy Whitmore as our only recurring guest so far. We've met with her twice, speaking about both the research that we've done at Zero Labs and then research at Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, and then some of that combined research. I'm really excited today. This is someone that we're going to have on that I've never actually met before. I've never worked with previously, and I'm really interested in all things that she has to say. Our guest today is Kavitha Mariappan. She's the Executive Vice President for both Customer Experience and Transformation at Zscaler going back to October 2018. She's got vast experience in hyperscale activity, primarily as an executive with high impact roles in marketing, product management, engineering. A really interesting bunch of companies in her background: Databricks, Riverbed, Cisco, Philips. Really seen some neat things in her career. Right now, today, she's responsible for driving global transformation and integration across all aspects of Zscaler's business, their customers, their strategy. So really excited. Kavitha, thanks for making time to speak with us today.
Steve, it's an absolute privilege and an honor. Thank you for having me.
Are you ready if we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
So as I look at your background, which I'm genuinely impressed with, I look at you've got experience, you've seen this entire industry change and grow. What I'm most interested in is your background in the transformation business. A lot of people talk about transformation. You've actually got a career in it. So I'm really interested in what you've learned transforming Zscaler in your current position and how that's been across your career.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to start with. So, Steve, a little bit of a history lesson here. I originally studied engineering at university. That's kind of how I cut my teeth. And I grew up in Australia, where I spent most of my formative years and then moved to the Silicon Valley, coming up to actually about 25 years in the Silicon Valley. And since then, obviously, as you pointed out, I've held a broad, varied range of positions, starting in engineering, moving to product management, and then sort of, evolved into go-to-market roles from large companies to startups and then to hyperscaler public companies. So I came to Zscaler in my current position, actually, right after Zscaler went public, very close to 5 years next month, after a conversation with the founder and CEO of Zscaler, my boss, Jay Chaudhry. Jay was sort of looking to expand his executive leadership team, his bench, and to also create a go-to-market role that we did not have in the company pre-IPO. As we both got to talking, we quickly discovered that this was a really exciting opportunity for us to completely transform the way we as a company served our customers, and we're going to engage our future customers really from the initial interactions all the way through to kind of that, partnership, that life cycle of that engagement. And then the other focus we had was, for us as a company to continue to be agile and transformative as we continue to scale. Here was a company 5 years ago, hadn't thought, it's fantastic looking back now, where we were right after going IPO to where we are today. How we understood the company would scale, we would have various divisions grow and start to sort of take on a life of its own. How do we ensure that, atrophy doesn't set in and that we continue to be agile, right? And that, thinking of our customers first in everything that we do. So he had a vision to create sort of this office of transformation. And I guess, with my experience and our chemistry and our shared vision, I suppose, and the zeal to make the world a better place, it happened to be serendipitous. So
amazing. It's really neat to hear how it really just starts with conversations and so many powerful things come out of that. You mentioned a couple of things I've got to ask a follow-on question around because it's just so interesting. You talked about scale a few times and about transformation. What do you really see as the big needs and the workplace trends that are driving transformation from your perspective?
Yeah, and Steve, I think this is not a one and done, right? Transformation and digital transformation at that, and secure transformation at that, as we see it, it's a continuum. And as we've only seen, I mean, technology continues to evolve, and as we've only seen through the pandemic, sometimes not just market trends, but things get forced upon us that necessitate transformation at hyper speed. But if you had to kind of look at some of the convergent sort of trends and needs, especially as you look at the workplace trends, we've seen applications moving out of the data center into the cloud. We've known this, right? This has been happening. Apps are becoming, whether SaaS applications or private applications, that we're starting to think about refactoring and doing things with. And organizations need ways to think about securely connecting their workers, their users, and the end users to these applications. That's kind of where the first, shift occurs. And once we've done that, we've seen that happening, whether through sanctioned applications or that our folks are, doing shadow IT, we start to think about the fact that the network, the way it was, is no longer, tenable, right? We've always looked at securing a physical corporate network because everybody resided in the corporate, within the corporate perimeter. All our applications were in the data center on-prem. And now that that's all shifted, what would be the purpose of securing that physical corporate network perimeter? We have to start thinking about network security in a very different way. And then as we start to think about hybrid forms of work, all this traffic that was sort of primarily routed through a centralized security stack doesn't make sense anymore. Our workers are not tethered to their desks. We're doing what we want to do from wherever to be highly innovative, productive, and balance, work and life, as we've seen. And so that necessitates a change in terms of how we think about security, and so security transformation. The other kind of, I would say, trend that's being observed is, as all of this is happening, threat actors are not sitting still, right? We have seen an increase in cyber attacks, and as our reports have all pointed out, with our research team, our threat research team, we've seen from their most recent report, 47% increase in ransomware activity just in the last year. And they aren't going to sit still. And as tech evolves, and as we start looking at things like generative AI, et cetera, we're all in for a ride.
Yeah, I could not agree with that anymore. I think, we look at attackers and we tend to think of them as static, and they're not. They're innovating, they're evolving, they're transforming. And I think one of the things we see a lot at Rubrik, and we talk a lot about, is, that exactly what you mentioned. As an industry, we're used to defending an on-premises network. And that's just not the way the world works anymore. It's on-premises and SaaS and cloud. And we think that attackers have the same hurdles that we do running these organizations. And they seem really comfortable moving across SaaS, cloud, and on-prem. If anything, they're moving quicker than we're implementing and running these types of environments. And I come out of that space. You mentioned kind of that transformation over time. I typically come out of the infrastructure security side of the house. You've got your network boundaries and your email boundaries and your endpoint. And now I'm at Rubrik, and we're talking about data security and securing data. And specifically, this is what your team and our team's working on. How are we doing data security together? And it's almost a net new concept. And I know that's a little heavy-handed, but we're having to really see that securing data is radically different than securing an on-premises traditional network. So I'm really curious as what you see there. What do you see as the challenges to securing data? And is that actually different from securing an organization?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Steve, data is so powerful, right? Especially in a highly digitized world today. The amount of data that we're collecting, the amount of data traffic that that's traversing, all these networks, right? And the gravity that this data has, the power this data has, in itself gives us the power to do so much with it as organizations, but also obviously opens the door for threat actors to be highly nefarious, right, with that. And so I would say, today, the lifeblood of most organizations is that data. It's the intelligence, it's that telemetry that you can, glean from that data. It's that intellectual property, your customer data, your employee data, all of this critical information that keeps that business functioning. And it's a high competitive differentiator for the organization, right? And how you critically sort of manipulate that data and monetize that data, it's where your business is going to create sort of its differentiation, its value proposition. And so the bad guys know this, right? And at the end of the day, ransomware and many of these other types of recent cyber attacks we've seen hit at the heart of that data, right? The core of that data. And when you think about things like loss of customer trust or reputational damage, exposure to compliance fines, and just general disruption to the business. I mean, that's as you talk about business and you talk about critical infrastructure, we talk about, loss of operations and loss of, potentially, impact to human life, right? You can see how, a data-driven cyber incident or a data-focused cyber incident becomes an existential risk. So in terms of how we look at the challenges of securing this data, there are many, and we have a lot to do with them. In terms of like how as we focus on digital transformation, how IT and security organizations work together and think about how they do this. And you've pointed that out. I mean, data resided in one place and one place only. So we put all our eggs in that basket and looked at kind of the corporate data center. Today, you've got data everywhere. Public clouds, you've got private clouds, you've got hybrid, environments, you've got remote users, devices, other than, specific endpoints that we talk about. We're also talking about IoT, OT devices that are collecting like some really interesting critical telemetry, right? You've also got data being accessed by third-party users, by contractors. So some of these challenges, essentially can even boil down to how do we, guard against potentially misconfigured cloud instances that would enable, the vast majority of our cloud-related data breaches. How do you protect from insider threats? Creating sort of better user awareness and data hygiene internally, where somebody with either advertent or inadvertent intentions could potentially be, exfiltrating this data, right? Or a user not knowing it. So I think at the end of the day, if I had to kind of say like one challenge, right, that I would think about, that we're seeing more of it in the coming years of being sensitive data being improperly potentially generated into, entered into generative AI engines. I mean, that, these tools will likely boost our productivity and in incredible ways. And, they have the potential to really probably transform and become the next revolution. However, all our organizations are hampered by how do we handle this? How do we put our arms around this and enable new forms of data loss prevention technologies? So we have to think about this very carefully in terms of how we secure our data, right? How we collect data. Should we be collecting some of this data? How do we secure some of this data? How do we store some of this data? Do we really need data specifically for all these years for forensics? Specific industries and verticals should be thinking about this. I talk to customers all the time. They're like, well, in our business, for compliance reasons, we've got to keep stuff for 30 years. Do you really need to keep stuff for 30 years? How much of those, will you ever use for forensics? Should there be a need for it? And improperly stored data becomes a huge challenge, specifically in highly regulated industries like healthcare and finance. And we've seen many breaches, I think, specific to that. Long answer to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I could ask a million follow-ons, but I like, we always kind of have a couple of professional hot takes, one each, and then a couple of personal hot takes. I love your hot take here. I really love this discussion around, do we need all this data? And especially, I think generative AI does really potentially take some of these, I hate to say academic discussions, but it moves them to the forefront. These are not light conversations anymore in the context of generative AI. And I think I'll double down on your professional hot take with my own professional hot take that we don't need all this data. And I come out of this space in the threat side where the more data you have, the more credible you are. And I believe in that. But I think that doesn't mean that the ways that we've done this as an industry, and I think honestly at Rubrik, we see a lot of clients securing a lot of data that they just don't need. It's either duplicative, or you mentioned timeframes, and those aren't, people just aren't looking at data that way. And then all of a sudden you have a breach or an accidental exposure or an outage. And now you're having to deal with the ramifications of all of that data, when I think almost universally, when people take a step back, they're probably saying to themselves, we don't need all of this, or the danger is not worth the return we got in it. And I think we need to really start critiquing how we approach data that way. And I think you're dead on. Your discussion about generative AI and tying into that, those are unavoidable topics now. And they probably should have been before, but it's a big issue now.
I mean, even attributes that we're collecting, right, specific to PII data or other things, do we really need to be collecting that, that type of data? Like organizations, I think, need to be mindful of that. Specifically as people go into the realm, and many countries and companies are moving into the realm of unified identity, right? Like, your state level, your federal level, all your credentials being stored as kind of a digital ID. And that's awesome, right? And we start to think about data sovereignty and who protects this, right? Critical information.
Absolutely. And how much of it can you actually use as metadata versus needing the core data? Right. I think these are important topics for every organization to look at. And one thing I really like about this topic is that our organizations are working together on this. I'm sure on both sides have talked about this Rubrik and Zscaler partnership, but I think what I love most about it is it's not frankly a business decision. We're not making any extra money on it. Your organization's not making any extra money on it. But I think our leaders sat down and just had a conversation and thought, we can leverage these two technologies together to do exactly what you mentioned, secure data better. Take the best of what you do, the best of what we do, and provide something net new to that. I am personally excited about things like that. In my career, those kinds of partnerships, especially when it wasn't for a business reason per se, that just wouldn't be done. And I think we're seeing lots of these kinds of things, not just between our organizations, but in the industry. And I think you also look at things like the war in Ukraine and lots of organizations working together for these other reasons. And I think there's a million examples. It seems to me like a real sea change. And I'm curious, do you think it's actually a true sea change, or is this more of a moment in time? And what do you think about these kind of partnerships and working together efforts?
Yeah, Steve, one of the things we truly believe in at Zscaler is that the power of an ecosystem, right? And we've constantly kind of nurtured that, across the board. And we don't believe we can do everything and should be in the business of doing everything. There are best of breed partners out there that are great at what they do. Our customers, love working with them, and naturally creating sort of this ecosystem with these best of breed partners makes all of us better, and it allows us to better serve these, end users, right? These end customers that have entrusted their business to us. And so, when we as a company look at Zero Trust as the right framework, for us, it's important that, we partner with and nurture an ecosystem that also has kind of common philosophy, right? Such as yourselves at Rubrik. So as we start to think about cybersecurity specifically, it's a very broad field, and it's made out of so many sub-disciplines, right? We think about identity access management, endpoint security, cloud and network operations. So it's really a need for all of us to work together and also continue to push each other to be highly proficient, because this is one area where we cannot be complacent. We've talked a lot about, existential risk and, reputational damage and all of those types of things. We got to get better together at our game. And this is in creating that common and philosophy and the strategic partnership so we can all execute on that Zero Trust philosophy together. So that's, my personal opinion, obviously, and us as a company and what we believe in and why we're super excited, obviously, to be partnering with you guys at Rubrik.
Yeah, and I think your comment there around making sure that we do this the right way and zero trust is so easy to look past. And it's one of our big ethos. I mean, our boss, Bipul, has been adamant that we won't engage in anything that's going to undercut that core security and that zero trust philosophy, and be able to work with your organization that approaches things the exact same way. We can deliver a capability without asking anyone to give anything back. We're not having to reduce confidence, reduce trust. I think that's really, really important. So we're in total agreement there. I think I'll maybe try to have some disagreement with my first personal hot take. Then we can have a business question. Then I'll ask you for yours. My hot take is going to be on music. So my daughter, who's 19 and off at college, swears Beyonce's Renaissance album is her best. I disagree. I love Beyonce, but I'm not a big fan of the new Renaissance album. I get a lot of comments about I'm too old, but I'm Gen X. Gen X is super cool. I just am not a big fan of the Renaissance album. So that's going to be my personal hot take here. But kind of staying with things that may shock a little bit. One of the things that frankly shocked me as I look at your background and your LinkedIn and your resume is you've got a really long experience leading customer experience at these hyper growth companies. At Zscaler, you've been doing it for the last 5 years. I've been lucky to work with some great customer experience organizations, enough to know how hard that job is. That can be a really difficult position. And I'm just really curious, what's your secret? How have you been able to do this for 5+ years? And is that something you intended to get into or just kind of worked out along the way?
Yeah, Steve, first and foremost, I'm with you there on Gen X, right? We are the coolest generation. So I think we got this to start with. Secondly, talking about customer experience and how I got into this, and sort of going back to how we started today's conversation. I had not envisaged starting my career in technology and then going to go in market, and I never even thought I would even experiment with marketing, or I was a CMO for 10 years. As an engineer, I never thought that would even be a thing, right? And then moving into this realm of customer experience, and to be really honest, sometimes taking the road less traveled, and being open to these opportunities, and the incredible people, professionals you meet. Especially people like Jay, who are visionaries, right? And people, your career can often take a turn for something quite spectacular, right? It becomes a fantastic learning experience and a journey, and it gives you an ability to obviously create impact. I hope I've been creating impact, but you asked me what it's like and how have I had the longevity, obviously, in this role. The customer's always right. Let's remember that. And our focus really here is, in ensuring that we're delivering positive experiences. And my org actually, and my mandate really not only looks at customers, but future customers, right? How do we bring them into the fold? How do we have them, create awareness, education around zero trust, security, make sure that every touch point and engagement with us as, in their interaction with us as a company is positive. So I do deal with a lot of the gnarly stuff, but at the end of the day, the ultimate validation is not only having customers have successful, deployments and operations, but their ability to turn into advocates. That's the ultimate validation, right? Where they're so excited about the impact they've seen, the change this has made to their organization, their day-to-day, their careers, that they're so happy to become advocates and speak for and share best practices with their peers. And to me, I think that's my secret really is to be focused on customers. I spend a lot of time on the road. I meet with customers. And make sure that we never, ever become inwardly focused, with my team and we're listening.
I love all of that. I mean, this is in particular topic for me, something I've learned the hard way in my career. Early in my career, it wasn't I thought the customers were wrong, but I thought I had all the answers and I knew best and I could bring the best thing. And what I learned was that's not the right approach, and that I was actually much, much more effective when I was able to really hear what the needs were and what was working and wasn't. And I know that sounds so basic, but I had to learn that the hard way. And once I got my arms around that, the outcomes became so much more productive and positive, by the way. But I was just delivering more of an impact, and our teams delivered more of an impact. And this is something that I just wish I had taken this much more seriously, much more earlier in my career, because it just works. And I'm sure right now our respective marketing teams are thinking this session is probably pretty boring because I'm just agreeing with everything you're saying. So maybe in the vein of spice up a little bit, would you mind giving us your one personal hot take? It can be about anything. It doesn't have to be about Beyonce or boomers.
Oh,
Anything that you think is a good opinion.
yeah. Look, my personal hot take is, look, um, there is no better time than to be in cybersecurity today or tech. I always think about people coming into very linear careers, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. You don't have to start in tech to end up in cybersecurity. It's something I wanted to leave everybody that's listening, today with, or IT. The journey can be quite interesting. And I think today is probably, if there's one exciting time to be in tech and IT and security, this is it. And my hot take really is that, looking at my journey, you take the road less traveled, because you're going to have a fascinating time. You're going to have a fascinating time. This is an amazing time where tech and domain science and honestly, the arts are converging, right? As we look at AI, as we look at some of the challenges, my hot take really is let's shake things up, right? If there's a generation out there looking at, should I be considering a career in cybersecurity IT? I say jump in.
Yeah, I could not agree more, and I think it's one of those things where no one knows where this is going to go. Your comments about your path very much echo my experiences. My undergrad's in anthropology. You couldn't find someone farther away from cybersecurity than I was. If you had told me 2 years ago I'd be here today having this conversation with you, I wouldn't have believed it. That wasn't the path I was on. This space there's so much need and there's so many interesting things, and it turns on a dime. And I love that. It's exciting. And if you don't like what it is today, just wait till tomorrow, because it can be completely different. And I'll leave you with this last question. As you look at your journey and what that has been, are you more optimistic or are you more pessimistic about where we're at in cybersecurity today?
I'm optimistic, and I think the target's on all our backs, right? So there's no taking your eye off the ball, right? But I'm optimistic, as I said just a minute ago, in terms of the opportunities that exist, and the ways we are able to manipulate science for greater good, right? But that also means that the bad guys are watching and they're doing the same thing. So, this competition between, cybersecurity practitioners and cyber criminals is not going to come to an end anytime soon, right? But I do believe we've recognized these flaws. I do believe we're, from a global perspective, we've put cybersecurity in the center of the of the mirror, right? Of the view. Everybody understands the power there is with this. So I'm optimistic because this is time for great development, innovation, and change. And I think, at least I'm hoping that we can converge around a framework that helps us really kind of start to resolve some of this, with the zero trust. And I think the challenge for us is going to be how we convince organizations that it's really time to change your mindset. This isn't about tech. A lot of this is about cultural change. A lot of this is about people, right? Organizational cultural change, changing your mindset from doing things the way you've done before. Because if you do not, you will be a victim. You will fall victim. And we don't want that. But I'm honestly, as I even end with that not very optimistic message, I am optimistic because there are ways to get around this, and many organizations have. And so embrace that change and be optimistic about how you view security as a change agent in your company. And I think some of the intelligence and telemetry, and in the your organization, Steve, the intel that you're gathering from this not only allows us to keep our orgs safe, but it's giving us a ton of intel and telemetry to think about the kind of organizations we want to shape for the future, right? So security is already becoming a change agent.
You gave me a bunch of great talking points there. You said a bunch of things I try to say. I talk all the time about tech is never the point. Tech is one of the details we use to execute the outcomes, but it's not the point. And you mentioned the research and the things that we can learn about the threat. The biggest thing I say about our research team here, research teams anywhere, your only job is to enable decision makers to make the right decision. That's it. It's not to build fancy tech. It's not to like that. That's all it is when you strip it down. And I think when we look at the challenges you mentioned, I'll go with that theme of just couldn't agree anymore. I think you're absolutely right. This is about people and what we're doing. And there's just tech that we need to make that happen. And there's tech on the threat side, and we need to get our arms around that. But they're people too. And this is inherently a people business. So I love all of that. Kavitha, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciated this. And I'm definitely stealing your line shamelessly about manipulating science for the greater good. So I'll say thank you for that as well.
Thank you for having me, Steve. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.